Hi everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people were asking for last week when I did my potential new classes that could be added to World of Warcraft video. So for example, I got a comment from Epic O who said that, hey, I'd rather have new specs for all classes, or hey, even just some. Hard to do another spec for Druid when they already have 4, but Demon Hunters need a 3rd spec, maybe something like Holy DPS for Priest that's burstier than Shadow, Necromancer spec for DK, stuff like that. But all the same, Nubkeks, that was a fantastic video and everyone should like, comment and subscribe. Thanks for that, Epico. That was very, very nice of you to stick that in the end right there. That's very kind. So yeah, in today's video, this is going to be part 1 of 2, where I talk about my ideas for a new spec for every single class here. We're going to cover the first 6 classes alphabetically in today's video. Hope you guys enjoy it, and then check back in a few days or so. These take quite a bit of work, but check back soon, and I'll have the second part where we cover the other 6 classes as well. Before we dive into today's video though, I want to take 1 minute to talk to you about the sponsor of the video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for you to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, or just get lost in your creativity. And this month, with May just on the horizon, I was checking out the Discover Your Next Summer Project playlist curated by Skillshare. And there's lots of different types of classes here, but I was very much drawn to the food ones this month. The perfect grilled cheese, a mini class to master the sandwich. Yes, please, I want to know. Or hey, I live in Ireland and we're still in lockdown here. You know, I can't go to France or Italy to get some gelato. Well, never fear. Make your own gelato. Tips and recipes to make the delightful Italian frozen treat by Marie Asselin. Grazie, Marie. Now, Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can keep focused on deepening your skills or even exploring some new ones. Their premium membership is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will actually get a free trial of that premium membership, so you can try out all the different classes for yourself. To paraphrase one of Skillshare's messages, there's nothing better than getting better, except grilled cheese. So go give Skillshare a try. Now, the first class we're going to talk about, edging out Demon Hunter ever so slightly as the first alphabetical class in the game, is Death Knight. And a lot of people, obviously myself included in the previous video, I was talking about how Necromancer would be a great spec for Death Knight as this sort of ranged caster, focusing about summoning in the undead minions and having them do all the work. But I went back to the drawing board and I thought about it and I said, you know, that's actually, it's almost the same as Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knight really is a Necromancer. Does that add all that much new? Yes, it would be ranged and that would be cool, it would be different, but is it enough? And I decided no, and in fact, I'm going to a suggestion that a lot of you gave, and I want to give my take on it, which is you guys were asking, often in the guise of a new class, to be fair, for a Blood Mage. Now, what makes a Blood Mage? I mean, technically in Warcraft 3, it was just a Fire Mage. Kael'thas was a Blood Mage, because they were Blood Elves. We'll ignore that, though. So, the more traditional Blood Mage is kind of like a vampire, right? In particular, I'm drawing inspiration here from Vladimir in League of Legends. And what is he? What does he do? Well, he is a very short range mage. And one of the key ideas of Blood Mage is that you use your own health, your own hit points to fuel your abilities as opposed to using, you know, mana or whatever. Now, in World of Warcraft, there's a couple of problems there. I mean, the main problem, of course, is that, well, healers exist in the game, so a class that uses hit points as a resource, there have to be quite a few. It has to be a bit more nuanced than that, because you know, you just spend your health and hey, you get healed back really efficiently and oh no, your class is overpowered. So here's what I think they could do. For me, a Death Knight Blood Mage would be an almost melee range caster spec, right? Which is different from anything we have in the game right now. Right, melee classes are melee classes. I guess you got a couple of melee healers that sort of cast in there. But for DPS, you're either a melee DPS or you're a ranged DPS. All the casters are ranged DPS. We don't have a melee DPS caster. So that's where a Blood Mage Death Knight would go. They'd be, you know, 0 to 10, maybe even 15 yards near a boss. But they're not hitting it with melee attacks. No, they're just using their spells. Now, a lot of these spells, of course, would be instant cast spells. You can maybe cast a bit while moving. So for example, Blood Drinker from Blood DK would work fantastically here, which is that channel spell where you suck the blood out of your enemy and you can move while channeling. A great and very iconic spell that could come over to this Blood Mage spec as well. And to capture that gameplay idea of using your own health to fuel your spells, I see them not having runic power, still having runes, but instead of runic power, having blood power, which would work kind of like Arcane Mage Enlightenment worked. If you guys are familiar with that Azerite trait, I think it's even a talent right now, though I'm not sure if they run it, where you would have your blood power bar, which represents your health, and when you start draining it by casting lots and lots of spells and burning through it, what happens? Well, you start to get really nasty debuffs, nasty penalties. Maybe penalties to your damage done, maybe penalties even to move speed, to healing received. There's a lot of creative things we could think of here that would be kind of nasty debuffs, but would capture the idea that, hey, like you are literally like ripping all of the life out of your body to throw these really powerful spells at somebody. And the flip side of this is, much like runic power works, you would use your rune abilities to regenerate life, right? So again, transfusion from Vladimir. It's a big single target nuke, instant cast. Let's say 1 rune, bam, nuke the target and refill a chunk of your blood power bar. So there you go, core gameplay loop right in there. Now, we obviously need a few cool abilities to actually make this exciting, right? That's the system explained, but is it exciting? Not yet. It's certainly not exciting yet. What can we do? So cool ability number 1 I thought of, very much inspired by Lightning Lasso from the Elemental Shaman in PvP, and also slightly inspired by Darth Vader, I guess. The Blood Mage Death Knight, he could grab his target, sort of lift them into the air, and then just suck all the blood out of them, basically like stunning them for like 3 seconds, do a huge amount of damage to them, maybe could do a big chunk of healing to the Blood Mage, and also do tons of damage, refill their blood power as well. Yeah, and just badass. They could even float in the air when they're doing it. That full vampire, just I am stronger and I control you feel. Vladimir in League of Legends has this really cool ability where he just disperses into the ground, becoming untargetable, and he actually does AoE damage to everything standing in that pool of blood, and he can move around. I think something like that could be really, really awesome. And then, of course, we're doing AoE. You'd have abilities that, you know, like Blood Boil from the Blood DK, bringing something like that over, but essentially, you know, your AoE abilities are emanating from you, just letting out these blasts of blood, these waves of blood, of dark power, just emanating from your body to really emphasize that melee caster gameplay style, to really emphasize that melee caster gameplay style. And to crown it all off as well, what I would love to see, and I think would be just super badass, is bring the rune blade in, bring the sword in. So most of the time it'd be on your back, right? And you're just casting spells. And heck, even maybe half the time you're floating around like a void form priestess, you know, kind of floating in the air, flinging your blood, doing your magic thing. But that, as one of your big cooldowns, or maybe like as you spend your blood power, you build up stacks and stacks and stacks, you get to like 20 stacks of this thing, and then you pull off your ultimate move, maybe even just like disperse in a pool of blood, poof of blood, reappear behind your enemy, pull out that rune blade and just deliver this massive strike, right? Bringing that rune blade gameplay in there a little bit, kind of emphasizing the fact that, hey, you are still a Death Knight, right? Even though you are this advanced spec, you're still a Death Knight. And I don't know, I just think that would be kind of awesome. So yeah, that's what I would like to see. And that is Blood Mage Death Knight. It's a little confusing if you got Blood and Blood Mage. You guys are into the lore, you could tell me. I mean, would calling them San Lane be too much? Is San Lane like a specific race or group? Would stretching that be too much? It probably would be. I'm not getting my hopes up, but it would sound kind of cool and just kind of be more distinctive. Like, I don't know. All I'm saying is there's Panda Death Knights, okay? The lore can stretch. The lore can stretch if we need it to stretch. The Mechanome Death Knights will make it happen. You can trust their undead robotic limbs. But yeah, I'm curious because that would be kind of cool. Imagine San Lane Death Knight. That would get people hyped. So that's idea number 1. Class number 2 then, and obviously I think probably the number 1 class that would want a new spec is the Demon Hunter class. Because hey, right now, they only have 2 specs, right? They've got the fewest out of any class in the entire game. What I would like to see for Demon Hunter, I'm going to call this spec Nemesis, right? This is the hardest part of coming up with a new spec for Demon Hunter. You have to think up a suitably edgy and stupid name. So that was the best I could come up with. It's sort of a reference to one of the Havoc talents that was removed, I believe, in Shadowlands. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So yeah, I think that would be nice. But let me know if you've got any better edgelord ideas. Could we call the resource Pain for fun? Would that work instead of Fury? And could we rename Rage for Fury Warriors into Havoc just to make things really confusing? That might be nice too. Okay, but back to the spec here. What would I want for this spec? I would want a ranged Demon Hunter. And this is not really the most original idea because I'm just going to point you straight to Diablo 3, where there literally is a ranged Demon Hunter in the game. So I think for the core non-meta part of the gameplay, I'll come to meta in a second because that's where things get spicy. But for the non-meta part of the gameplay, I think this would play very much like a ranged Havoc Demon Hunter, right? You could still even have, Fell Rush, Vengeful Retreat, zipping around the place, being pretty mobile, shooting on the move with maybe dual-wielding hand crossbows, like they do in Diablo 3, or they could just use, bows or guns or whatever in World of Warcraft, if that's too much to ask for. And it would be a relatively simple spec of, build up Fury and then spend Fury while being nice and mobile. Where, of course, it gets interesting, as with all the Demon Hunter specs, is when you bring Metamorphosis into it, actually turning into a demon. And I think for this, we actually already have this in the game, the perfect spell for this. We've got Fell Devastation, which is the Vengeance Demon Hunter version. We've got Eye-Beam, which is Havoc Demon Hunters. I actually think if you go and you take Fell Barrage, which is a quite niche AoE talent for Havoc Demon Hunters, and you repurpose that as a ranged ability for this new Nemesis Demon Hunter, I think you've got the perfect thing here, where that, they are at range, they turn into a demon, and then just this barrage of Chaos Bolts comes out towards the target. I think that would be super cool. And believe it or not, from you guys that played Warcraft 3, you'll remember that in Warcraft 3, the Demon Hunter Metamorphosis form was actually a ranged form, right? They had a ranged attack, throwing these chaos projectiles to do damage. But the thing for me that would really differentiate this and set this apart is that I think that when they turn into demon form, that this Nemesis Demon Hunter should be a traditional style caster, which means for the most part, standing still, having cast bars. So the idea here is that you've got your normal form, where you're very much like a Havoc. You're zipping around, you're mobile, it's just a fast-paced builder spender spec, quite simple. But then the Metamorphosis form, you turn into a caster. Like, there's just nothing like that in the game right now. Like, there's nothing like that. Like, 1 second you're a Beast Mastery Hunter, the next second you're a Frost Mage, right? It's that sort of feeling. It's that sort of crazy idea. And I think that would be really, really cool. And it would also be super popular as well because, that sort of mobility, zipping around the place is cool. Turning into a big demon, blasting out a Fell Barrage, and then having, like, these cool chaos spells being thrown out. That's super freaking cool as well. So yeah, I think this would be a super popular spec. It'd be really fun as well and visually awesome to see. Yeah, I think this would be great. So there's tons of ideas in Diablo 3 and how they implemented the Demon Hunter to bring into some of that core gameplay, some talents, some big cooldowns, all that fun stuff. But yeah, normal form, you're zipping around the place. You're kind of like a BM Hunter, kind of like a Havoc Demon Hunter, and then caster form for Metamorphosis at range. That's my idea. The next class we're going to talk about is the Druid. And out of all the classes in the game, arguably this is the one, in fact not even arguably, this is definitely the class that needs a new spec the least, right? They already have Guardian Druid to tank, Feral Druid for melee DPS, Balanced Druid for range DPS, and then Restoration Druid for a healer. They have every single role covered in there. They have 4 specs, that's more than anyone else. What more could they want? I got a lot of comments from people that wanted a class even, which would be focused on the dragon aspects, kind of a dragon knight channeling the power of the dragon spec. Now, I actually think that there's a great option to have a spec for Druid which does this. Well, oh, dragons are really cool. Nubkeks, why are you saying we might not like this? Druids would love to turn into dragons. Well, the reason is I think this should be a healing spec. Now, bear with me because I'll explain why this would be so cool. But yeah, I think this should be a healing spec. I think that would work well for Druid. It's traditionally a class with a really strong healing theme. So I think being another 2 healer spec class actually fits perfectly with Druid. That would actually work really well. Let's dive into the healing dragon then. Now, I'm basing this very, very strongly on the hero Alexstrasza, I'm sure you know. But her version, her incarnation in Heroes of the Storm, which I think did this just incredibly well. One of the best designed just gameplay loops, character designs, literally in any game I've ever played. It made healing one of the most badass and fun and rewarding things in any game ever. It was awesome. The way that she worked and the way that this Druid spec, which by the way would be called Lifebinder, tying into Alexstrasza, and I think sounding pretty cool, the way it would work would be that you would have your two forms, right? Most of the time you would be in your human form, but then very, very occasionally you could turn into your dragon form, which would just vastly empower your ability. Let's cover the human form first, so that's for a baseline. Do the more boring stuff first. So I think while you would have mana as a resource for the Lifebinder Druid, that would be entirely used to fuel your transformation into a dragon. You wouldn't actually use that for any of your healing spells in human form. Instead, you would be basing your healing around cooldowns, and also around spending your own life. So in particular, again, Alexstrasza had this ability in Heroes of the Storm, Gift of Life, where you sacrifice a chunk of your own life to then heal one of your allies for, I don't know, like double or triple that amount, something like that. And again, I think to make this actually work in World of Warcraft, you could have it apply a debuff to the Lifebinder Druid, and then every time that you cast this big instant cast or a nuke heal, within that period of time would just stack up that debuff again and again and again, and it would just increase the damage that they themselves took without actually increasing the healing that it did. So this would be sort of a bursty single target nuke heal, kind of like the sacrifice heal that a Holy Paladin can do, but it's being a more central part of their kit, but it would punish you for casting it too much. Now going alongside of that, you'd still have your rejuves, ticking along. That'd be fine. Then we'd also have the, I think it was called Abundance, maybe? Something like that. Kind of the circle of healing sort of thing. Was one of her most iconic abilities in Heroes, which I think would work really well in WoW and be very different as well, which is she would put this big circle on the ground, and it would just sort of glow, it would sort of grow in power, and then after about 3 seconds, it would erupt with this big burst of healing. It would do this massive chunk of healing to all of your allies that were within that circle, right? So they kind of had a couple of seconds to react, get in there, and get this big burst of healing. So again, I think that ties in really, really well, because that's not something that we particularly have. We've got effects like Healing Rain or Efflorescence on the ground, but they're very low and steady healing. Or then obviously you've got kind of burst healing like Holy Word Sanctify from a Holy Priest, for example, is a big chunk of healing in an area, but those are like instant cast. Because it's obviously, it's difficult to play around these healing effects on the ground. It's difficult to play around that, but I think that would be okay because it is an advanced class. And then obviously one gameplay interaction you should already be seeing here is that, okay, if we've got this big nukey single target heal, but it costs our own life to spend it, and we can sort of stack that up and really start ripping through our own life. But then we also put this big chunky AoE heal on the ground that, yeah, we can use that to like heal our tank. We can also use it to heal ourselves, and then we can do more of that single target nuke healing to the tank. Okay, there's a little bit of a synergy there. Or then likewise, another little spell they could have would be grow this little flower on the ground, like this burst of life on the ground. You walk over it and it gives you a heal. So kind of like healing orbs for monks, for example. Obviously that's a difficult thing to make work in World of Warcraft, people to notice these flowers and to actually step onto them for a heal. But again, it's an advanced spec. I think that's okay. And again, there's also the synergy that, hey, even if your teammates aren't using your little flowers, well, you can use them because, again, for you, your life is a resource to heal other people with. So hey, if they're not going to take those heals, you can take them, and then you can do those direct heals. So at least there is some gameplay there. There's a nice couple of little ideas for the core of the human gameplay style, but let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about turning into a gosh darn dragon. It's certainly the hardest part, right, of this is simply the size, right? To actually turn into a dragon, dragons are pretty big. It kind of obscures the camera a little bit. I think that would definitely, without any doubt, be the biggest problem here, the biggest question mark. But I'm sort of confident that they could make it work. But the way I would see it working in terms of gameplay, to again set it apart from the other healers, is that we would have that human form gameplay, be okay, but not really all that strong. Instead, it's really that massive power spike of going into your dragon form. Now, as I said before, your mana bar would be entirely dedicated to your dragon form. None of your regular abilities would use it at all. So your mana becomes this very particular resource. So going into dragon form would cost a flat up chunk of mana, but then when you were in dragon form, it would be draining mana. But that drain would get stronger and stronger and stronger the longer that you were in dragon form. So again, a little bit like Shadow Priest worked in BFA or Legion. The difference being that you wouldn't be ramping up in power, that simply staying in dragon form for longer would just give you access to those more powerful cooldowns. So you'd be kind of gaming the system a little bit. Like, okay, pop into dragon form really quick, throw out one rotation of my big spells, pop out of dragon form. I'm only in for a few seconds, I'm out again. Maybe for some medium healing, I'm in for 2 rotations. Or then again, the option and like, starting off in an arena fight and it's just horrible. Or going into like a raid boss and there's this massive damage window. Just go into dragon form, burn through loads of your mana, but get through several rotations of those spells and just be super powerful. Of course, then afterwards, you'd be out of mana, no dragon form, you're really weak, and you could get punished. Just like any other healer would, being, blowing up all of their CDs at once. Suddenly, they're left with not much mana, no CDs, and they're not very strong at all. One example of a cool spell in dragon form, again from Heroes, when Alexstrasza turned into a dragon, her basic attack would change into the Dragon Breath attack, which would cleave AoE damage in that cone, but it would also cleave healing to any allies that were caught within that cone. So again, this ties into that very, very geographic play style of this spec I've already been talking about, very focused on these ground effects, that you would have this cone attack that would do damage and also heal. So you're thinking about your positioning and catching as many allies and enemies within that as possible. And again, the thing that really differentiates this from other healing specs is that you have control over when you go into dragon form, how long you stay in dragon form for. It's really about how much mana you have and when and where you spend that mana, compared to, let's say, other healing specs where it's like, okay, to get kind of good value, good efficiency, I want to try to use my healing cooldowns. I actually want to try to use them. You want to try to keep them rolling as much as possible. So, you delay them a little bit for those healing windows, but often you kind of have to keep them rolling. This is a spec with much more control for you. It's much more up to you when and where you spend it, which I think is really fun. I just want to show you her ultimate abilities from Heroes of the Storm as well. So Lifebinder was the first one, which is the name I've given to this spec, and this is awesome. It's like a 2-person Spirit Link. She would essentially Spirit Link with one person, let's say the tank, and it would equalize their health. Or in fact, in Heroes of the Storm, it brought the lower HP person up to the current percentage HP of the person they were linked with. So yeah, if your tank was super low and you were super high, it would bring your tank up to you. If, your tank was kind of low, you put it on, and then they try to target you down, it would bring you back up to your tank. Kind of interesting. There's interesting gameplay there. Maybe a little bit too powerful for WoW, but you could have it do something like a Spirit Link effect. Again, it's just it'd be a more interesting single target damage prevention cooldown than Pain Suppression or Iron Bark or whatever. They're fine, but they're just kind of flat damage reductions. Like, they're only okay. This would be more interesting, equalizing your HP, bringing them together, and then maybe boost them up by 10%. So something like that, kind of working together, and then obviously it's efficient for heat, much like Spirit Link. Healers can heal both of them. AoE spells become very efficient in terms of topping up both people. It would certainly be an intriguing external cooldown. And then her other cooldown, the name of which I forget, it's kind of like an AC 130 from Call of Duty. Remember that from back in the day, where she would just take off into the air, and then every second or so, she'd fire down in dragon form this fireball that would do a damage and AoE to the targets in that area, but also healing. And again, she could sort of target that around, and then she'd land back down afterwards. So something like that would work here as well. Whether she could become actually invulnerable, like you could become invulnerable doing it and kind of disappear in the air, I don't know, might be a bit wacky if you're in a raid room with like a low ceiling. It might be a bit odd, or like a dungeon with a ceiling. Would that work? I don't know. But something along those lines could be pretty cool, right? Just again, targeting these things, trying to catch as many allies as you can in this big AoE every second or so. There you go. Is this the solution to struggling to find healers for your raid team or for your dungeon teams or whatever, your PvP teams? Give them let them turn into a dragon. It's gonna be awesome. They'd love to play it. It'd be super badass. But we'll see. Let me know what you think. It's a bit of a crazy idea. Would it block the camera? Is it too crazy? Or is it actually cool? Let me know down below. And let's move on to the next spec. For our fourth class here, our fourth potential spec for Hunter, I'm gonna cheat a little bit on this one. So I already covered in one of my previous videos where I talked about potential specs that should get a rework. I actually talked about Survival Hunter in that one, and I went over my ideas for how Survival Hunter could be and should be changed into a tanking spec, right? So you get rid of like the weird sort of stuff with throwing bombs or firing your dinky little hand crossbow that sort of magically appears in your hand. Forget about that stuff. Instead, focus on fighting in melee alongside your pet, right? The hunter and pet working in unison, working as a pack, the hunter sort of embracing some of those aspects, right? Embracing some of the brutality, some of the natural fierceness of what it means to fight as a beast, right? As like your beast companion would. And then for the tanking element, for that mitigation, that active mitigation, again, what it would really focus on here is your pet absorbing the damage for you, them being sort of your shield, which is already core to how hunters play, like questing and doing solo content, right? That's something you're very familiar with, but your pet would be your shield, and you're sort of managing then two health bars, the hunter's health bar, but also your pet's health bar. Now, you can't really heal up the hunter health bar, that's your own health bar, but you can heal up your pet. So effectively, your pet sort of works sort of like active mitigation. It's kind of like a shield block sort of thing, right? It would absorb some of that damage for you, and then you work together, you attack together, fight together to restore health to your pet. And there's this potential for awesome attacks, right? Where you can get your pet to like just zip around in AoE and jump to everything and hit it all. It's like a big AoE attack. There's loads of cool ideas here. I think that would be fantastic. It's not I mean, they could even make another spec, but I think survival is kind of struggling for identity right now and to find a place and to actually be played. So for me, it would make the most sense and also save them some time to simply rework an existing spec here. So that's why I think Survival Hunter should be made a tank spec. And that'd be pretty freaking awesome and be a really cool and very different way to play a tank in the game. All right, next up, we are going back to Crazy Town. We're talking about the Mage. Now, the Mage, as you probably already know, has 3 range DPS specs. So with the 4th spec, it should be a 4th range DPS spec. No, we're not doing that. No, sir. What I think should happen, I think a lot of people have also suggested this in the past as well. Appropriately, I mentioned the past, because this Mage spec should be all about time and should be a healer spec. Now, I'm going to call this the Chrono Mender. It also could be like a Chronomancer, but I think Chrono Mender sounds kind of cool and unique, so I'm going with that. But yeah, this would be a mage healing spec that's all about manipulating time to turn back the time on wounds taken, to pause time, freeze people in stasis to avoid abilities, all that sort of stuff. So to give you an idea of some of the cool spells they could have and the gameplay niche they could fill, I think that this could certainly be a spec that would focus on helping their team deal with soak mechanics, right? We see soak mechanics all the time. So for example, they could have a spell Stasis, where you just put a teammate into what is effectively an ice block, but, you know, kind of frozen in time, right? Put them in this ice block effect for, 2, maybe 3 seconds. It's just this short little window where they are invulnerable to damage, so they can do that soak mechanic in a fight. They can dodge that greater pyroblast in PvP, something like that. It's a powerful effect that ties very well into the game, and it fills a niche that we don't really have, but it wouldn't necessarily be game breaking. To do like big group healing? How do you do big group healing as a time mage? Well, I think the idea of a time loop would be pretty cool, right? So you activate this time loop, then for 8 seconds, you cast as many spells as you can, and then after that time loop ends, suddenly this image of you from the past appears, and then they just repeat everything that you just did. Over the past 8 seconds, they come in and they just repeat it, right? So it's like you replay the last 8 seconds. This image of you conjured from sand, like, bronze dragonflight comes in and repeats it, right? So you just spam out a burst of a big chunk of raid healing, and then boom, this clone of you from the past comes in and then just does it all over again. Just doubles up the value of everything you did. Kind of cool. Or we could also draw upon I think it was the Artifice of Time. I can't remember what the actual name of the ability was. This was one of the essences, one of the necklace abilities in BFA. But this was, you could put it on a player and it would essentially pause all damage and all healing that they received, right? So no damage or healing would happen to them for like 5 seconds, but then all the damage and healing that they would have taken instead now gets dealt to them over the next 5 seconds. So it comes in as this dot and heal over time effect, right? So kind of interesting. You know, if they took fatal damage, okay, they took crazy amounts of damage, they're going to die very, very quickly with that dot, but at least it gives you some time to respond and some time to play around it. Again, I think a really cool idea that was literally already in the game as an essence, bring that in as one of their major cooldowns. I think with their core healing would be somewhat similar to, you know, to a Resto Druid. It would be mostly heal over time. I think it'd be quite inspired for me by things like Wild Growth for Resto Druid, where it starts off being very strong and then sort of tapers off. So they could have some heals that give you, you know, a big burst of initial healing in the first couple of ticks, and then their ticks get smaller. Or then they could also have heals that start off very small but get more and more powerful. Things like that. So you'd have two dimensions then to this Chronomender. You would have the kind of just non-cooldown gameplay style where it's a lot of heal over time effects with sort of different pacing to them. But this would really be a spec which is all about very flashy and very unique cooldowns. So again, like freezing people in stasis, pausing the damage that people are going to take, having a time loop version of yourself come out and repeat all of the things that you just did. There's a lot of potential fun things there. And yeah, it just brings a class which is up until this point always been a ranged damage spec, and it opens up another option for them, another avenue, which is healing. And again, I think it would be a pretty cool and fun way to do it. It just gets more people willing to play healer, and I think that's just a great thing for the game. And that brings us to the final spec, the final class for today's video, the Monk. I was going to say that this is a bit of a bold choice here, but I feel like a lot of these specs I've been suggesting so far have been bold choices. But I'll tell you the spec name straight up here. What I want to see for the Monk as their fourth spec is the Jade Dancer. So if you guys have played any Eastern role-playing games before, you'll probably have bumped into the Dancer archetype, which is typically quite a supportive archetype, but I actually wanted to be something very, very different here. Because when I was sitting there thinking about it, I was like, man, a Dancer spec would be kind of cool for the game, right? It's a little bit different, right? Very elegant, all these dance moves, but how do you actually make that into a spec? What would it actually do? And that's how I came up with this. The Jade Dancer would actually be a ranged DPS spec. And the gameplay of this spec would be taking one of the ideas that almost but didn't quite work before and kind of having a second go at it, this time being sort of wiser from the lesson learned. And that is the old Shadow Priest gameplay, specifically from Legion and BFA. So what you would essentially do is you'd have a couple of different damage over time effects that you could put on targets, like I don't know, like a Jade Wind, or I don't know, Magic Touch. I don't have any good ideas for the spell names, okay? The important thing is that there just be a couple of damage over time effects that you'd have to manage keeping them up on different targets. But then the way that you would really do damage would be by doing your dances. These would essentially be building up buffs on yourself that would make those dots then tick for more damage, right? So this is I played Shadow Priest in BFA, and this is essentially what you did. You put your dots out on targets, and then it was just about maintaining your void form as much as possible, which made your dots tick faster and faster and faster, and then they crit more and more and more and do more damage. It's a really cool and unique gameplay style. Obviously it had a lot of balance issues which would need to be addressed for this Jade Dancer, but I think there is a core of an awesome gameplay style there. And I think the idea of this dancer like ties really well into it. The biggest obstacle for sure would be just simply there'd be quite a lot of animation work, you know, to make a few of these different dances, which you could channel to do different things, right? So maybe one of your dances would let your dots sort of spread around or bounce around to different targets, ones that would intensify the damage. There's a lot of very creative options for what they could do here and the effects that they could make happen, but just be very visually cool and also unique. As you can tell as well from me calling it the Jade Dancer, this is maybe a more controversial idea, but I do think that it should be one Celestial per Monk spec, right? So for example, we've got Zwen, who's with Windwalkers right now, Yuzhao, the Ox, which is with the Brewmasters. Mistweaver at the moment has two. It's got the Red Crane, Chi-Ji, and then it also has Yulan, the Jade Dragon. So what I propose here is, again, a bit of a rework to Mistweaver, which I've also got a lot of comments of people saying that that is a spec that should be reworked. And I actually do somewhat agree for sure. So this, again, I'm sort of hinting towards it. I'm not hinting towards it. I'm saying it directly right here. This is not hinting. What they should do is take Mistweaver and focus it in on the Red Crane. right, as the Fist Weaver, as a healer that is healing through, punching and melee and things like that. And then take the Jade Dragon, take Yu'lon, and make Yu'lon specific and exclusively for this new spec, the Jade Dancer, which, again, I think is a pretty cool name for a spec, and it also brings Monk out of melee. It brings Monk potentially into this ranged role, and it brings back a gameplay style that some people were glad to see go. They didn't enjoy it, but I know for me and a lot of other people that we were sad to see it go. A different style, sort of a dot-focused spec that's kind of just about applying dots, but then about buffing yourself to enhance those dots and sort of interacting in that way, which I think would be fun. And yeah, just very visually different. Very, 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 very visually different indeed. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of part 1 here of potential new specs for all the different classes in World of Warcraft. I hope you've enjoyed part 1, and do let me know what your favorite ideas were. How would you rank these? And of course, come back for part 2 in a few days. But certainly, the way I'm kind of looking at it is they could easily do 3 new specs per expansion. And that could be, let's say over the next 10 years, right? We've got 5, let's say 5 expansion every 2 years. 10 years, it's a long time. And this would keep us busy for a long time, a whole decade. But they could do like 1 new class with 2 or 3 specs, and then they could rework, 2 or 3 specs, or add 2 or 3 new specs per expansion with 12 existing classes. That keeps us going for a decade. So it'd be kind of important what order you would want them to come in, right? So yeah, I'd be kind of curious to hear what you think about that. But these are my ideas for the first 6. I hope that you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.